Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ray of Adoptee Reclaimed. Looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm excited to be here, Simon.
Yeah. So, healing. We all talk about it, and every person that I'm asking this question to has got a different take on it, a different answer to that question, and as I was just doing some sort of journaling, and I was thinking, like, well, if we haven't got clarity on what we want, if we want to heal, and we haven't got clarity on what we want, then we've got no chance of getting it, have we? Well, not no chance. I guess it might happen accidentally, but being intentional about it seems somehow to be a little bit will give us a higher probability.
Yeah.
And I guess as a coach, that's what you're all about, right? So what does healing mean to you?
Yeah. So I'm an adoptee myself and an adoptee coach. I've worked with adoptees from all different backgrounds of adoption. And healing looks a little bit different for every adoptee, but ultimately I think it all comes down to my core belief that it's an act of reclamation. That's why my handle on Instagram is Adoptee Reclaimed. That's what we work with every adoptee, is to recenter themselves in the loss of self they may have experienced in adoption, and to really reclaim what it means to be adopted for them, and to reclaim that sense of self in a really healthy way, a version of themselves that can handle joy instead of sort of the loss and the trauma that they may have experienced through adoption.
Yeah. So this identity thing, is that what you mean by recenter themselves in the reclaim the loss of self? Is self and identity? I'm using those interchangeably, but are they? Do you see
Sure.
them as interchangeably?
I mean, yes, they can be kind of interchangeable. Identity is a very broad kind of catch-all term. It can mean anything from just knowing their origins, their birth story, their ancestry, which is important to making career decisions and health decisions. To more significantly, some have lost cultures and countries, and finding ways to explore those and discover what that means for them in their own terms, and find their communities that honor that side of them, is all a part of what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting one. So it's a thing I'm pondering at the moment. So I'm thinking about writing a book, and I've got kind of two themes, and I could
Uh-huh.
go either way. One is healing, and the
Yeah.
other one is identity.
Ooh, that's a good combo.
Well, as a combo, yeah. I was thinking, trying to choose between the two, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm. I
you're seeing them as a combination.
I
So
see them as a complete combination, definitely. I think um healing for adoptees, for many of us, it looks like overcoming some of the emotional challenges that adoption has presented to us. It looks like getting answers to questions that we maybe were never really been allowed to ask, right? And in doing that, you become more fully yourself. So the process of the healing is also the process of self reclamation. And at some point, I think most adoptees that I've encountered, and certainly in my life, you wake up and you realize you're a very different person than you were before you started asking those questions and before you started pursuing that healing, which is some of the exciting part about being an adoptee and kind of coming out of the adoptee fog and seeing how adoption is a part of your story.
yeah, yeah, it's a part of our story, but like story and identity get intertwined and confused as well. From my own experience, I would say that.
Hmm. I Can you elaborate a little bit more in the tanglement that you're describing?
Yeah. Well, when I started, when I kind of came out of the fog, and I think I had two. I, I think coming out of the fog is a repetitive process. I just think the first
Mhm.
one is the most significant.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah, so on my first moment of coming out of the fog, which is when I was 40, I after that I ended up on a retreat that wasn't for adoptees. It was just for people having identity issues or emotional issues, right? And we spent basically 5 weeks. It's not 5 weeks. We spent 5 days on this retreat. There was 8 of us, two people leading the workshop and 6 of us on it. And it was about separating our story from who we are.
Okay. I find that fascinating, and I've heard of that kind of approach for certain things. A lot of times, like adoptees who encounter addiction and stuff, there'll be sort of a need to separate that story from the self. And I think it's true. It makes sense. Certainly. I also would argue, from my perspective, that we are all creatures of a story. We all kind of put ourselves as the main character in relation to the world, in relation to the events that have happened to us. And I think part of being an adoptee is realizing that your story is maybe bigger than you originally realized, and that you are maybe not fully aware of who you are. Does that make sense?
It does, and it goes to this. It goes to this this clarity and identity again, right? So I see a lot of we watch a lot of television in the evening. Well, a lot. We watch television for a couple of hours in the evening, most evenings. My wife, and we watch a lot of cop shows for some reason, and whether they're British or American or German or Polish, right? With subtitles. There's always a cop who's an addict, right? Who's in AA.
Yeah.
And now the 12-step movement has clearly made humongous impact over its time. Sure. And yet one of the challenges that my philosophy, one of the clashes between my philosophy and 12 steps philosophy, is that they say I am an addict, right? I am an alcoholic, whereas I would see, and I have no personal lived experience on this, so this is just my philosophy, right? And ex-addicts or addicts listening to me might be screaming at me, "Shut up, Simon!" But I've started, so I finish, right? So I see drinking is something that is something that we do, and our actions aren't us. We are not our actions. So I'm looking at this quite in Simon logic, like I'm not my story. Well, so you could say, well, I could say, well, I'm the character in my story, but I'm not the story.
Sure.
I'm definitely not I'm definitely not the voice in my head. So the voice in my head talks with my voice, but it's full of secondhand beliefs. It's stuff that I've picked up from other people. It's conditioning. So the story of my life, the voice in my head, my actions, none of those are me.
Yeah.
I'm not my trauma either. Most significantly, it's separating, in my view of the world, and what's been most significant for me in my healing over the last 17 years has been separated who I am from the trauma that I feel. So I will say I came up with a metaphor for this that ties in all this stuff together, and alcohol, right? So this is perhaps a tricky one, but apologies. So I say trauma is a toxic cocktail of fear, insecurity, shame. Fear, insecurity, shame. Those are probably the top 3, right? But we are the cocktail glass,
right?
Not its contents.
Of course. Yep.
So I'm separating. So that's the fascination for me, is identity. Separation from the story, separation from the trauma, separation from the habits.
Yes. So I love this kind of description you're providing in that example of the cocktail glass versus the cocktail, etc. Um, I think that's such a really interesting way to see it. And one of the reasons why those things get so entangled for adoptees is because our trauma, the liquid in our cocktail glass, happened right at the very beginning of our glasshood. For so many of us in those very formative, very developmental years, as our brains, as our neurons were literally forming connections about who we are and who the world is and how we position ourselves within that, adoption happened as well.
Yeah,
And this gets used into so many adoptees' identities, which is why I think for many adoptees, the process of healing and reclaiming their identity tends to be a bit of that messy entanglement of the story, the trauma, the
yeah,
contents, the actions, the who am I not, and one of the really exciting privileges I have is walking with adoptees as they start to see those distinctions, as you've pointed out, and realize that they are, in many ways, more than that experience,
yeah.
more than that trauma.
So I'm gonna I'm gonna adjust I'm gonna adjust the metaphor to make
Sure.
it more realistic, right?
Uh-huh.
So, given on the back of something that you said, so if we think about the fear in our and the stress going on in our birth mother's body, right?
Sure.
There's cortisol, right? Is cortisol?
Cortisol is the stress
Yeah,
hormone. Yeah.
cortisol is a stress hormone, right? So in a way, we've been preloaded. Our
Mm-hmm.
cocktail glass came preloaded with cortisol, and that's why it's tricky. That's why the cortisol and the glass are kind of intermingled rather than separated.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, interesting point. I don't know if this is the segue you were planning, but I actually at one point was looking into some medical background, and I actually did get tested for cortisol. Very run of the mill part of my life, very normal, nothing stressful really going on at that phase of my life. And I at that time had 3 times the amount of cortisol that is considered high for a stressed human being as like a natural part of my system. And that was undoubtedly related to a lot of that infant, as our brains are developing, as we're receiving the cortisol through the umbilical cord, all of that type of stuff is impacting me to this day. And it is part related to healing and identity. It is a part of who I am. And it is a factor I have to keep in mind when I'm trying to heal myself and try to kind of identify, why am I experiencing, for example, hypertension or chronic fatigue, all of these sort of things that all again replay very scientifically and medically into the sometimes very abstract and emotional story of, I was adopted, I have a family, I have a birth family, who am I, how do I, all of these things swirl together for a lot of adoptees, and
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
fascinating. And I had no segue planned. I,
I just took that one on a right
yeah,
turn.
yeah. No, no, but it's great. But it prompts to me something that happened 24 years ago, and
Mhm.
I was stressed at the time. Now, mainly stressed about work. I went to see somebody that was doing some Reiki or something a little bit like Reiki,
Yeah.
and she was putting her hands over my body, not touching my body, which I think that's Reiki, isn't it? And she said
Yeah.
that she had never felt the heat. She'd been doing Reiki for a long time. I don't know how many people she'd done Reiki on. So say she'd done Reiki with 1,000 people. She
Right.
had never felt the amount of heat coming off my body
Yeah.
than in any of the other people that she'd done Reiki
Yeah.
for. And and we're talking about cortisol, we're talking about heat, we're talking about stress, we're talking about
Right.
um, we're talking about what the body keeps the score stuff, aren't we? Um,
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
so which is why the one of the themes that comes up it's coming up more and more so is this, and I'm looking at this somatic stuff. I'm looking at a pure play somatic healer. I'm talking to a pure play somatic healer about stuff about working together in a couple of weeks, so that we can look at that body-based approach. So again, yesterday, a couple of days ago, we released a podcast with a holistic therapist who was talking about mind, body, soul, and obviously all that combination there with the body stuff being maybe the last to go. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think in my limited experience with a couple of different adoptees, the obstacle to that healing is different depending on how and where that trauma, I guess you could say, shows up, and where the story has been developed or left untouched. And so, as you're saying, many adoptees will go and seek out physical types of healing, vibrational healing, if that's their type of thing too. And that can work. It can work for some of the body, the somatic stuff, if it's trapped in the body, for sure. But some of it also is cognitive, that inner voice in your head, the emotional story that you've told, and the ways that it keeps on replaying in the mind. For many adoptees, it's you have to balance the two when you're seeking healing as an adoptee, because again, those two will always be intertwined. I find there will be adoptees who, we'll be in a session and we'll be talking through the story, the emotions, the characters, the places, and they're solidifying it, and it's giving them some confidence, and then they'll physically feel tightness in their chest, right? They'll feel their body holding them back. So there's obstacles there that are physical, somatic. And other times, they're really relaxed and loose and healthy and they're doing well, but there's they have a strong emotional reaction to feeling rejected, and it's constant and it's intense, right? And so we have to kind of balance the two for adoptees when we're looking at ways to heal and reclaim that identity.
Yeah. So do any particular healing moments in your life come to mind, Ray?
Yeah, I was working with an EMDR therapist, and I have, as many adoptees, a long and tragic tale of not so good therapists who were not adoption competent. It's part of what got me into coaching, actually. But this therapist was really good and understood that there was something pre-verbal related to what was holding me back. So we did EMDR, which is sometimes good for pre-verbal trauma, which many adoptees have because we were adopted as infants or very young. And she led me through an exercise and asked me to try and imagine just kind of what was kind of coming up related to the topic we were talking about. And I was kind of confused. I'd never done EMDR before. I was muddling through this process, and I was telling her, like, there's a dark lake and some pine trees, and there's these two like Precious Moments dolls. And for some reason, the Precious Moments dolls creep me out. I'm very uncomfortable with those ones. And it was weird. And in that, it was a standalone moment. And it was the first time I did EMDR. And I was like, that's weird. I don't know why that was what my brain was coming up with. I have no connection, I think, to any of these. And about 2 years later, completely distinct from this session with this therapist, I was in reunion with my birth mother, and she wanted to give me a gift. She was really excited. She says, I've kept this for you all these years. And she gives it to me. It was a baby blanket that she kept me in the few days that she and I shared a home when I was first born, before she lost custody of me. And it was a baby blanket with the exact two Precious Moments dolls that I had in that EMDR session on the blanket.
Wow.
It was wild. It was wild. Before my brain could remember what a Precious Moments doll even was, I understood that something scary, forlorn, drowning, all of these sorts of feelings were associated with this Precious Moments doll. And then years later, and completely unrelated, I mean, she handed it to me, I got goosebumps. I was like, oh my gosh. That makes sense. Like, I understand why, when my body and my brain were trying to make sense in that therapy session and I was coming up with Precious Moments dolls, here it is. It's concretely tied into that loss, to that separation we had.
Yeah. Your eyes lit up when I asked you that healing moments question.
Yes, I think I love that, because I hear so many stories from so many adoptees, and so much of my life has been a constant battle to look for healing. I think I think it was a constant look in the mirror for me, like, what is wrong with me, right? Like, I was in my adoptive family, I didn't fit, they didn't understand me, they couldn't get what was going on with me. I was in these social circles that my adoptive family wanted for me, and they were nice, they were good people, and they just didn't fit. What's wrong with me, right? And so I think a lot of times for me, for my story, it was a constant like, why can't I get better? What's wrong with me? And so when you said, what's your favorite moment of healing? I mean, that lights me up inside, because it was such a moment of, I guess, relief to be
Yeah.
able to finally make progress, you know?
So how does that separation from the trauma inform what you just said?
Can you ask that again, but just give me a
Yeah,
little
in a
more of the
different way.
background?
So you asked the question, your kind of question, and I've asked the question a million times.
Sure.
What's wrong? What's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what's wrong with me? And I'm trying to put that question, what's wrong with me, with this thing that we were talking about 5 minutes ago, separating who we are
Mm-hmm.
from the trauma that
Yep.
we've been through, or the trauma we feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, little kids don't have the privilege of that distinction. When you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're a kid and you don't know what trauma is. It's not your business to know what trauma is. It's not your job to understand mental health. It's not your job to understand the physiology of trauma, right? Like, that's not what kids do. And for us, for adoption, it being a predominantly childhood experience, um, being able to separate that is not something that kids can do until they are older. It's a privilege of maturity. It's a privilege of cognitive development that many of us don't achieve until we're much older.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think, I lit up when you said, what's your favorite healing moment? Because I, as a kid, before I could make those distinctions, was desperately trying to. And when I finally grasped that, and I got the EMDR to match up with my reunion with my birth mother, I was like, oh, there's the distinction. I have the words that categorize those things. And now I know I am uncomfortable with precious moments at all, because it is related to loss and grief. And now I can create the glass and the cocktail. Now I see I am the glass and the cocktail is that trauma, and that creates that distinction. Then for the first time as we heal, and you sort of start to separate those things out instead of them all being muddled together.
Yeah. Well, I think none of us were told that. We didn't know that because none of us were told that, right?
Definitely.
And none of us were told that because adopt whoever was doing the best that they could with their knowledge.
Right.
So
Yeah.
um, I've got this thing for me. So when were you born? That's a rude question to ask a lady, but I've asked it anyway. So when
Oh,
were
I'm
you
sorry.
born?
When
When
was
were
I
you
born?
born? Yeah, what
I
year?
was born in the 90s, late 90s.
Late 90s. Okay. So I was born in 67, and
Okay.
the Primal Wound book didn't come out until 1993, right?
Hmm.
So I think that I have at times in my life judged 70s parenting with judge 70s parenting um, with 90s knowledge. They didn't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They were doing the best that they could.
Right.
And that, for me, that takes it takes the blame, any blame off my parents. And it
Sure.
blaming them is gone. Resentment towards them then is gone. Anger towards them is gone.
Right.
And with all that, all that is part of healing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think
Like
so. I think a lot of bitterness and resentment can go away when adoptees are given the space to heal and identify the ways that those distinctions exist. For me and for a lot of adoptees of my generation, especially in the US, 80s and 90s adoptees, there was a large religious related movement towards adoption. And so a lot of adoptive parents parented under um, weakly informed understandings of adoption trauma. And if they were inclined or told they should be inclined to learn more about that parenting for how it would be unique for the adoptee, I think a lot of it, at least in my experience, was sort of in very narrow religious channels. So a lot of those parents had some access to more information, but perhaps didn't realize or didn't consider it as necessary because they had this sort of religious adoption agency saying, well, here's all the like nice freshly cut material for you to read. And it wasn't always as scientifically informed, it wasn't always as holistically informed, it wasn't as respectful as I would have liked it to have been. I think
Yeah.
for a lot of adoptees of my generation, of course, every adoption is different, every adoptive parent is different, but I do think that there were limitations. A lot of younger adoptees like myself see in our parents that we do still have to face and confront, um, and make peace with in our own way.
Yeah. So can I take you back to that healing moment then on the EMDR? So
Yeah.
you get this blanket. It's got these dolls on the blanket. You
Yeah.
see you see why this fear in this dream tracks back to the blankets. Yeah,
Mhm.
is that a
Yeah, yeah,
kind of a good
not
summary
dream,
of?
but EMDR session. Yes, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, no, yeah, the EMDR session. Sorry. So what's the talk me through the shift that created for you?
Sure. I think initially in the moment I was shocked. It was just shell shock, like, oh, whoa. Something's really connected here. And I folded that blanket and I put it up in a corner of my closet to like let it sit for a minute. And after I had let it sit for a minute, I think the transformation was almost immediate. I think I felt more confident in my approach to my story and my identity as an adoptee because I was like, yep, that affected me. And I can say that with some certainty now. Um, and it sort of eased the sting of the unknowns that I still have in my story because I know why those unknowns are unknowns. They're not just things I'm reaching for. I'm not just overthinking it. I'm not just making it up, right? Like it's clearly there. I can see that in an unrelated EMDR trauma session, I have this related trauma, and I see the physical blanket that like is tied to it. And it just gives you a sense of certainty. It gives you a sense of peace. I think you kind of feel more settled into yourself, knowing that there are answers to some of these questions, and even if they're not nice easy answers, it's not just a constant vague grasping. And that was the transformation when I found that connection, for sure.
So it was almost uh, personal validation
Hmm. Yeah,
of
personal validation.
of the wound.
Right, it's validation of the wound, but also easing of it, because so much of that is the gaping unknown. So much of it is like, why do I feel so sad around my birthday? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, and you don't have the words for it. And I say, trauma anniversary. That makes sense. And it just eases that wound. It gives you a chance to feel more complete and say, yeah, I know that that's going to happen. So, if I'm going to be sad around my birthday, for example, I can make some special plans to take care of myself, to ask others to help, keep an eye out for me and make sure that I'm, giving myself lots of space to process big feelings. I'm not undertaking major projects, and you can just start making adjustments once you've got that, I guess, closure of
Yeah.
starting that healing process.
So is that about the unconscious becoming conscious?
Yes, I think it is. I think you've got the nail on the head there.
Because that's a, um, for me a four-word definition of what coming out of the fog is.
Mm,
It's when the unconscious becomes conscious.
mm, I like that.
We become aware of it, and it's almost as if we've been scared. Uh, yeah, no, I'm not sure if I've got the right metaphor here. Um, I'd been scared of failure in business for a long time and not actually had a failure. But I chose to pull the plug on a venture about 11 years ago. And so I would deem that a failure. But the failure wasn't as bad as the fear of failure.
Right. The anticipation is worse than the actuality,
The
definitely.
anticipation was much worse than the actuality. So it was almost, yeah, it happened. And as I say that one, I'm thinking that's not a good parallel to your story. So maybe I need to listen back and figure another one. Or maybe
There's ties. I can see the ties. They're a bit abstract, but you're right. I mean, the unknown, or the anticipation, however you want to call it, does impact our functioning. It impacts our approach. It impacts the story we tell ourselves in our head, the way that we feel in our body. It impacts the ways that we move forward and proceed when we have, you know, something hidden in the dark and we don't want to venture out. But when you shine a light out there, you're like, oh, okay, let's go.
and I loved your I loved your metaphor of easing the sting of the unknowns.
Yes.
And then you talked about the gaping unknowns. And I'm thinking the questioning. The questioning and I'm thinking about the what's wrong with me question. When we've got, is it because when we get clarity that we're not our trauma, that we see that it's what people say. This is an easy one to, and it's a kind of a flip comment to say, but I think it's some cliches that become cliches because they're true. What do we talk about this? It's a normal reaction to an abnormal occurrence.
Yeah.
And we're not going mad, right? Do any other healing moments come to mind?
You know, I think right now, I think I'm going through a bit of a healing moment. I've recently gotten surgery that leaves me wheelchair bound. And that was kind of an unexpected, it's temporary, but unexpected sort of segue in my life. And for the first time in my life, I'm really having to fully depend on someone else to take care of me again. And I've always been pretty fiercely independent, almost to a flaw. And so it's been really great to experience that now. And as an adult who's healed from a lot of adoption trauma, to see that like caretakers are a good thing and there isn't contention necessarily in getting my needs met, and I'm not too much, right? And if there's something wrong with me, there's someone who's willing to help me figure out what it is, right? If I'm in pain, I need more water, whatever it is. It's been very healing for my inner child, I think, and that's something I've been honestly enjoying. As much as I hate being, wheelchair bound and less able to move as I used to, it's been necessary, I think, for me to step back and say, care and receiving care in community is a good thing.
Yeah. What differences do you see between emotional healing and physical healing? Similarities and differences, or whatever.
In relation to this particular experience, or just generally?
Well, generally for physical healing, and specifically for adoptee emotional and psychological healing. I don't know. Would you?
Yeah.
I mean,
Let's
if
phrase
we were
it as
going
another question again, and I'll get my thoughts organized around it.
Okay. So, what similarities and differences do you see between the healing of our body and the healing of our hearts?
The body is much more recognized, accepted, and studied. It follows patterns. It has systems. We have years and years, decades, and centuries of medical and anecdotal and scientifically studied knowledge about it. The healing of the heart, of the self, of the who you are in relation to your family and how your family relates to you and who you are in the world because of it, right? All of that is very relational, is a little bit harder to look at, to see. It's not physical in the sense that we can give you a pill for it. So here you go, adoptee, you won't feel sad on your birthday anymore, right? It is intrinsic to the person to make it change. Whereas physical things you can get another person to help you with, I think. And while you definitely can and do better as an adoptee healing in community and with, supportive people around you, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the physical healing we see in the world is something that is so easy to study and respond to in a technical way that other people can help you with it really well. But the heart, the emotional healing is so abstract and so unique to you that it takes you, the individual, delving in to really start those processes of change.
The difference for me is the just thinking about my own experience, and also what you just shared in terms of this moment with the blanket, is that healing in the physical world happens over time, whereas healing in the emotional stuff happens in discrete moments.
Mm-hmm.
So something happened. You put yourself. I talk about this quite a lot, right? You put yourself at the bus stop for insights.
Yeah.
You went to see the therapist, despite all the fact that the previous therapist hadn't worked. Yeah. And lots of adoptees can know a song about that, don't they? So, but you kept going. You didn't give up. So you kind of, there was a degree of openness and degree of action. You put yourself in you put yourself, you hung out at the bus stop for insights, as I like to call it. Yeah. And it happened. The one of the big shifts in your life happened in that moment, and it's the most obviously it's the most memorable because it's the one that you shared when I asked the question.
For sure.
It's the most memorable, and I'm sure there'll be lots of perhaps not as memorable moments, perhaps not as clear moments. Like, so my big healing moment was reading this letter from my birth mum.
Yeah.
And it was a very physical reaction that I had to that letter, the tears and the relief that came after, that sort of stuff. So it seems to me that so whereas I bust my arm, I bust my wrist a couple of times, and it took 4 or 5 weeks to heal. Do the X-ray so that takes time. Whereas healing the heart happens in lots, and it's once and done, right? Once my wrist is healed,
right, there it is.
Healed. You might say, well, it's weak and it could be broken again, but that's where there's a limit to every idiom kind of runs out of steam, and you can argue with it till you're blue in your face, especially if you're slightly argumentative and logical like I am with stuff. So but it happens over time, and it's once and done. Whereas our healing, the healing of the heart, happens in very discrete moments, which we can't make happen. We can't make them happen. The best that we can do is hang out at the bus stop for insights. And whenever I get nervous, sorry, listeners, right? You've heard me say this before. You are actually doing that by listening to Ray and me talking. You are hanging out at the bus stop for insights. So, welcome. Yeah. So that would be a distinction there. that
Mm-hmm.
I would draw. And also, I think that, we take this stuff that is the metaphors give a diagnosis and then doom us. So I'm talking about me here, right? So the metaphor, the primal wound metaphor, my instant reaction to that was relief at a diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not me.
Right.
And then the next thing that came in was, I'm stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and that's because I would argue the distinction hasn't finished. I think if you stopped at the, oh my gosh, the precious moments all scare me moment for me, not a healing moment, right? Then yeah, I would just be someone with a phobia of precious moment stalls. Right. But I think when you let it sit and settle, it turns into something more, and it becomes more than a label, right? And you start to say, okay, well, yeah, that could just be a label. I could just be scared of precious moment stalls, or I could say I have a reason for this, and so I just won't put any in my house, or what have you. It can be more than just a dooming sort of moment. I think if you let it, I'd argue that many times adoptees will initially think it's, oh, I'm diagnosed, right? So this happens with adoptees who are diagnosed with like RAD, reactive attachment disorder, when they're little. It was a way that people could kind of categorize their behavior that they thought was problematic, which would, and if they sit with that label and say, well, then I just have that, and they continue to have disordered relationships throughout their life, and they're creating problems in their romantic partnerships and in their, workplaces and whatnot. Yeah, they never went beyond the label. But when you say, okay, well, that's an interesting label, let's see how that affects me and what that looks like and how I would like that to change, we can continue that distinction beyond just dooming ourselves under it. Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's that shift, isn't it? So it's the shift to relief at the diagnosis, to feeling doomed. I'm stuck with this. I can't be unadopted. I can't go back in. I haven't got a time machine, right? I can't go back in time and not be adopted. And then the questioning of it,
Sure.
being in circles where there are a lot of coaches about, funnily enough,
Mm-hmm.
and where this is one of my little hobby horses, right? We don't hear the word. So before I got into the adoption space, I spent a lot of time in the personal development space, where beliefs are our bogeymen, right? And we're gonna shoot them. Yeah. That's nice, isn't it? What a nice metaphor. Thank you, son. Right. But in the adoption space, we don't hear, it's trauma all the way, but beliefs that the beliefs aren't talked about much. And the reason that's a challenge for me is, I think that's off, really, because this central, we can talk about, like I'm doing the somatic stuff, so I'm not a denier, right? I'm not a trauma denier.
Sure.
And I'm saying that one of the central issues that we've got as adoptees is that we don't believe we're good enough. It's back to that question: what's wrong with me? Right? That's a belief thing.
Yeah.
Now you can say, well, the belief comes on the back of the trauma. Well, yeah, sure, but you can bust a belief. I don't know. Can you bust a belief with a somatic? I don't know, but you
I
can.
would say we bust a belief with actions that counter it. A lot of times when we hit this roadblock, adoptees who I work with and we find that lack of definition, I'm not good enough, all of that comes from not having done things to satisfy the opposite of that belief. I think a lot of adoptees who limit themselves by that, I'm not good enough, no one will ever love me. Okay, well, stop hanging out with people who don't love you. Let's start with the action in that direction. And that's how the belief shifts, as we start to match our environment with our beliefs. We start to see that that makes more sense, right? And we can kind of intentionally create a healthy echo chamber that says you're worth it. You are more than your trauma. You are a really valuable, unique individual with all of these talents and skills and interests that don't match your adoptive family, that don't match your
Yeah.
biological family, sure, but they're uniquely you, and you can continue to build from that. And we can transition beliefs out of the limiting belief and into a growing belief, a growth mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's a book. I won't talk about that. She takes. Oh, I've started talking about it. She takes 12 hours. It's a big book, right? It's 12 hours. I can't remember how long it was, and I listened to it, and you can sum it up in 3 letters. Yet, right? I can't. I can't. I don't know. I can't do an adoption podcast yet. I can't see my way through past. I can't separate myself from my trauma yet. It's just the word yet, but she takes 10 hours to do that. The isn't is an insight the death of a belief?
I'm curious. Tell me more about your thoughts on that.
Well, we think something is true. We believe a belief until we don't believe the belief anymore.
Yeah.
So an insight is the death of a belief.
Sometimes I think an insight might be the first rocking of the boat. You know, there might be more than I see, right? It's an invitation to more.
Okay. I love that as well. But I'm going to shift your metaphor slightly to the rocking of a baby tooth. You know, when you still had your baby teeth and they get wobbly.
Yeah.
Get wobbly before they fall out.
Yeah. I
So
remember.
maybe an insight is when a tooth becomes wobbly. Yeah. And then it goes. But it takes a while. It takes a while for the wobbly tooth to fall out.
Yeah.
Where I'm saying the insight, the tooth is gone there and then. So maybe it's either or. Maybe sometimes it's that way. Sometimes
I guess it depends. I'm sure it depends on the nature of the belief and how it affects the person and how they're living it, and the nature of the insight and how poignant it is, and how, I don't know, how ready and willing the person is to accept it.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that's probably a weakness of my wobbly tooth metaphor. Sometimes they come back at some level.
Yeah.
Sometimes they come back at some level. It's down to the profundity of the insight, probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Like the difference between a nice idea, you know, an idea in your head, or something that you get in your heart, or a whole body experience.
Yeah.
So was your moment with the blanket, was that a whole body experience?
Yeah, it was an insight in the sense that it kind of just surprised. I didn't even know she had a baby blanket. I didn't even know I had a baby blanket, right? So it was an insight. It was a disruption of a belief that there was anything that belonged to me before I was adopted. And it was a full body experience. When she placed it in my hands, I got chills. I hadn't even unwrapped it. I got chills because I could see the top of a precious moment's head in the corner, and I unfolded it, and it was a full body experience, and it was an insight that just struck me. It shocked me, and I wasn't ready at that moment to pull the tooth out, so I folded it and I put it in a closet corner, and within a day or two I was just like, white knuckling my reflection in the mirror, like, oh my gosh, yeah, that makes sense. And I see now that whole belief that something must be wrong with me, I have no reason to think this, feel this, whatever, all of that has sort of started to shift, and you can start chipping away at it with further self-reflection and growth and good therapy and connecting with other adoptees and all of that kind of stuff.
So you used the word disruption there. I think that's pretty cool. I've not heard that. I've not heard the word disruption used alongside beliefs. So as a coach, then, are you is some of what you do? See, do you see what I did there?
Yeah.
I was going to make it about you, and then I changed it to something that you do. So I was going to say, are you a belief disruptor? Right.
In many ways, yes.
But then I changed it halfway through it.
Uh-huh.
I changed it, and what I was going to say was, so it's something that you do as a coach, belief disruptions, belief disruption. Okay. I was
Yeah,
trying to
that's
get back
interesting.
to that separation between what
Yeah.
we do and
And
who we are.
I think the best thing, Simon, about what I do is we separate until we don't have to separate anymore, and then we just let it be. And they just hand you your cocktail and say, here it is. And you're not sitting there saying it's a glass and it's got some, it's got some gin in it and it's got, an olive. You don't have to worry about the separation as much after you've had time to part and parcel it. Once you've been able to see and come into focus and how those things are and how they relate to you, the trauma, your experience of
Yeah,
adoption, your identity, all of these things, they do need to be separated for a little bit for the healing process, but at the end, I think in a really healthy scenario, they settle comfortably together and you just let them be in harmony.
yeah. So that comes to, I think, one of my own definitions of healing earlier on. Not
Yeah.
earlier on in our conversation, like something that came to me probably last year when I started first asking the question, right? So one one definition of healing is no more fear. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And another definition of healing is not being afraid of the fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people, and me, right? I'm talking about me. I think I used to be. I wanted the fear gone. I wanted the worry gone. I wanted the insecurity gone, right? Which is emptying the cocktail glass, right? Now I'm just sitting with the cocktail glass, or now I see healing as being comfortable with the contents of the cocktail glass rather than wanting an empty one.
Yeah, yeah. There was a great quote I saw that reminded me when you're saying these things. I just saw it the other day on Instagram. I don't know who the author is, so I can't credit them. I'm sorry, but it says, "You're not healing to handle more trauma. You're healing. You already handled the trauma. You're healing to be able to handle joy." And I would say you're not healing to identify and part and parcel all of the different parts of your story, your experience, your identity forever, because that's exhausting. You are healing, ideally, to comfortably look yourself in the eye in the mirror
Yeah,
and say, yeah, that's who I am. And I know what I want to do and how I want to change.
that's great. I love that, and it was you mentioned something along that at the start when I asked you what healing meant to you, and I didn't ask you about it, and it rang um, it rang a little bit of bell for me because I've never heard it expressed that way. So I'm glad that you saw the post on the Instagram, and I'm glad that you brought it back
Yes.
at the end, because I think that's probably a really good place to bring it in, unless you've got anything else that you want to share that I haven't asked you about.
No, I think this has been really exciting. I really enjoyed the dive into kind of the distinctions there, and some of the metaphors you've come up with, I think are really fun, the ways to see the healing process as an adoptee and as someone who works with other adoptees. I think it's valuable for more adoptees to find the method that works for them, find the insight that shakes their belief, that gives them the opportunity to heal and become themselves.
Cool. So about a week ago, I came up with the best metaphor ever on this stuff, and I did a
Yeah.
little video of it on Facebook. I posted it in a few different places, and it's rock paper scissors.
Hmm.
So you didn't happen to see that, no? Okay.
I don't think I have. Tell
All
me
right,
about it.
no worries. So this is the second time that I've described it. So hopefully I will describe it better to you than I did when I just did a single-hander, right? So rock, paper, scissors, the game. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the first part of the first thing in that metaphor is the rock. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the rock is who we are.
Okay.
That's who we are in this metaphor, in this game.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So the dominant metaphor for adoptee trauma is the primal wound.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Would you agree with that, or?
I yes and no. I think it resonates with a lot of adoptees. It makes a lot of sense, the primal wound for sure. So we'll go with it. Let's go with it for this
It
purpose.
does. It does, and yet I believe it's fundamentally flawed, and not just because it was created by an adoptive parent, but with its detail, right? And I'm pretty modest guy, so it helps. I don't normally say this, but I think my new metaphor that I came up with last week is better, but everybody's got to make their own mind up on it, right? There's no such thing as a second-hand insight. We have to have our own insights, right? So, if the primal wound was true, okay,
Sure.
a knife or something sharp has been involved.
Okay.
Yeah, like a pair of scissors. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get a pair of scissors and in the game, rock, paper, scissors, the
Sure.
rock beats the scissors, doesn't it?
Sure. Yes.
There is no cut. The
Mm-hmm.
rock is not cut by the scissors. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, in the kid's game or adult's game, play it, right? There's no cut to the
Mm-hmm.
stone. There's no,
Yeah.
yeah, they're just not sharp enough, right? They just physically won't do it. So if there's no cut, there's no need for any treatment. There's no need for any blood transfusions. There's no need for any bandaging, or I don't know. I could go on and on, so I won't, right? So, but nobody's denying, especially not me. I'm not denying the adoptee trauma because I've felt it, so I'm not going to deny it. What if our trauma, instead of being scissors, because we just kind of agreed that scissors can't hurt the rock, what
Sure.
if instead of being scissors, trauma was like the paper?
Mm.
So paper beats rock.
Yeah.
Paper beats rock in the game.
Mm.
So the paper hides who we are. It doesn't hurt who we are,
Mm.
right?
I like
Yeah.
that. I like the centering on the hiding. I think that's fair. Yeah, I feel like that's more my philosophy as well. I think the adoptee is always there. You've always been there, right? The wound happened, but it's about coming back from it. I like that.
So the insight is about unfolding the piece of paper
Uh-huh.
and separating who we truly are from the trauma that has veiled us.
Mm. Yeah, that's a cool metaphor. I haven't thought of it like that before, but I like how you kind of given us a way to kind of move from the primal wound to something more maybe adoptee centric. I think that's really neat.
And I just believe it reflects, like you said, it is in line with your philosophy. That reflects my philosophy in a way that the primal wound doesn't. And what I see is when people ask me about healing, I say, well, it happens on two levels,
Mm.
just for simplicity's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, let's go the whole hog. It happens on three levels.
Okay.
Okay. The psychological healing will be forever.
Sure.
The emotional healing will be forever too. And yet the essence of who we are was never wounded. We're not our thoughts, and we're not our feelings. They may be wounded. We may have horrible thoughts. We may feel horrible feelings, but we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings. We're the space in which that happens, and who we are, how we feel isn't who we are. And our thoughts and feelings don't change us. They just hide us.
We can actually change our thoughts and feelings, which is a neat thing to kind of work on.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Ray.
Thank you, Simon. I really enjoyed it. This was such an interesting conversation, and I will look forward to seeing it posted.
Okay. Thanks, listeners. Speak to you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.